farmers and young tradesmen. They had no blueprints and they had no tools, but they had something more dangerous: desperation. Their stories would become the legends of Tunnel 29 and Tunnel 57. Imagine the physical reality of this. Their stories would become the basement in West Tunnel 29, often an old bakery or a ruined shop. Imagine the physical reality of this. Their stories start under the death strip and break into a specific bakery or a ruined shop. Imagine the physical reality of this. Barely wide enough for a human shoulder. You are crawling through clay and mud 12 meters underground. The air is thin. The oxygen runs out quickly, leaving you dizzy and nauseous. Through clay and the water 12 meters underground. Constant enemy. The air is thin. A single burst pipe could drown you in minutes, or worse, cause the street above to collapse, alerting the guards. But the physical danger was nothing compared to the psychological terror above to collapse. Tunnel 57 was named after the number of people it eventually saved. It was a massive psychological terror. But to dig a tunnel 57 was named after the number of people it eventually saved. It was a massive psychological messages to the east. And this is where the Stasi, the secret police, thrived. Every time a volunteer showed up to dig, the team leaders had to ask themselves, is this man here to help, or is he a spy? Paranoia was the third person in the tunnel. You worked shoulder to shoulder in the dark with men you barely knew, terrified that one wrong word would end with a grenade rolled down the shaft. Yet, despite the terror, they succeeded. In October 1964, over 2 nights, 57 men, women, and children crawled through the mud to West Berlin. It remains the single most successful mass escape in the history of the wall. They didn't use guns, they used shovels. While the students fought the earth below, millions of West Berliners experienced a different kind of haunting every single day. The geography of Berlin was a mess. The subway lines, the U-Bahn and S-Bahn, had been built long before the wall. Some of these lines started in the west, passed directly under East Berlin, and then emerged back in the west. The East Germans could have cut the lines. Instead, they sealed the stations. West Berliners called them Geisterbahnhöfe, ghost stations. Imagine your morning commute. You are sitting in a modern, brightly lit train car. You are reading the newspaper. You are free. But as the train crosses the sector border, the train slows. The windows become mirrors against the darkness outside. And then you see it. A dim yellow light flickers on a dusty platform. The tiles are old and cracked. The station signs are from a different era. There are no passengers. But the platform isn't empty. Standing in the shadows, armed with machine guns, are the East German border guards. They stand motionless, staring into your train car as you rattle past. For 20 seconds, you are a time traveler. You are looking directly into a prison. The passengers inside the train would often fall silent as they passed through, witnessing the ghosts of the East, separated by just a pane of glass and a different political reality. Then the train would speed up, burst back into the West, and the doors would open. But the feeling, that feeling, stayed with you all day. The ground was blocked, the underground was hunted. So, in the late 1970s, 2 families in Thuringia looked at the only place left, the sky. Peter Strelzik and Gunter Wetzel were not pilots, they were mechanics and electricians, but they had an idea so absurd it sounded like a suicide pact. They would build a hot air balloon in their attic. This wasn't a military operation, this was a triumph of domestic hacking. They couldn't just walk into a store and buy 800 square meters of balloon fabric. The Stasi tracked large purchases, so they drove to different towns, buying small amounts of taffeta, bed sheets, and umbrella silk. They told shopkeepers they were part of a camping club. Up in the attic, the wives, Petra and Doris, spent nights sewing the scraps together on a simple pedal-operated sewing machine. Their first attempt failed. They crashed in the woods just meters from the border. They had to leave the balloon behind and sneak back home before dawn, terrified the police would find the wreckage and trace the serial numbers on their equipment. For weeks, they waited for the knock on the door. It never came. So they did the unthinkable. They built another one. On September 16, 1979, the wind conditions were perfect. They packed 4 adults and 4 children into a tiny wicker basket. They ignited a homemade burner fueled by propane cylinders. As they rose into the night, the flame was so bright that it cast a shadow on the clouds. They were a beacon for every border guard within 10 miles. Searchlights swept the sky. They climbed to 8,000 feet, shivering in the freezing air, praying the patchwork fabric would hold. Then the burner died. They plummeted. They crashed in a field in total darkness. They didn't know where they were. Had they landed in the west, or were they back in the east, waiting to be arrested? Peter Strelzik crept towards the edge of the woods. He saw a police car. He asked the officer, "Are we in the west?" The officer said, "Yes, you are free." These stories, the tunnels, the balloons, they are heroic. They are the stories we love to tell, but there is a darker chapter to the wall, one that didn't end when the concrete fell in 1989. The East German Ministry for State Security, the Stasi, was one of the most effective repressive agencies in history. They didn't just use guns, they used psychology. They employed a tactic called Zersetzung, decomposition. They would break into your house and rearrange the furniture. They would spread rumors that you were an alcoholic. They would gaslight you until you questioned your own sanity. But their greatest weapon was betrayal. The Stasi had an army of unofficial collaborators. By the end, it's estimated that 1 in every 6.5 citizens was an informant. When the archives were finally opened in the 1990s, thousands of victims rushed to read their files. They wanted to know who had reported them, who had stopped their escape. The tragedy was not finding a stranger's name in the file. The tragedy was finding the name of your brother, your best friend, your spouse. The wall didn't just divide a city, it divided the human heart. It forced people to choose between loyalty and survival. And that wound, that is a scar that no amount of reunification can fully heal. Today, pieces of the Berlin Wall stand in museums around the world. Tourists take selfies next to the graffiti. But when you look at those concrete slabs, don't just see a monument. Remember the mud under the finger fingers of the students in Tunnel 57. Remember the sewing machine humming in the attic of the Strelzik family. Remember the silence of the ghost stations. The wall proved that a regime can build a prison out of an entire country, but these escapes proved something even more powerful. You cannot build a wall high enough to keep the human spirit from finding a way out.
War is a machine designed to destroy the human body. It has clear rules. If you are shot in the head, you die. If you do not sleep for 11 days, you die. If you take enough methamphetamine to kill a horse, your heart explodes. These are biological facts. But throughout history, there have been a handful of soldiers who looked these rules in the eye and simply ignored them. These are the 3 men who glitched the matrix of human biology. Our first anomaly takes us to the meat grinder of World War I, 1915. It is the one unbreakable law we all share. We are slaves to sleep. Defy it for 11 days and you will likely die, except for Paul Kern, a Hungarian government official drafted into the chaos of the Eastern Front. During a suicidal charge against the Russian lines, a bullet pierced Kern's right temple. He fell. He was thrown into a mass grave. He was left for dead. But miraculously, he didn't die. He woke up in a Budapest hospital. His wound healed, but when night fell, Nate never came. Doctors were baffled. They theorized the bullet had surgically destroyed the specific section of the frontal lobe that commands the sleep cycle. They tried everything to force him under: hypnosis, sedatives, even ether. Nothing worked. Kern described it as being trapped in a chemical prison. His body would go limp from the drugs, but his mind remained fully, terrifyingly conscious. Kern didn't go mad. Instead, he entered a lonely, perpetual existence. While his family and city slept, he lived a second, shadow life in the silence. He read thousands of books. He walked empty streets. He watched the sun rise every single day for 40 years. He only rested for 1 hour a day, pressing his burning eyes shut, fully conscious, just to lubricate them. For 40 decades, he carried the crushing weight of total, uninterrupted consciousness. When he finally passed away in 1955, one can only hope that after 40 years of staring into the dark, Paul Kern finally found some rest. If Paul Kern survived by being too awake, our next soldier survived by being too fast. Welcome to the frozen hell of Finland, 1944. Meet Aimo Koivunen, a Finnish ski trooper on a patrol deep behind Soviet lines. His mission was simple: survive the ambush. Surrounded by Soviet forces, his squad had to escape on skis through deep snow. Aimo was the squad's designated carrier of Pervitin, military-grade methamphetamine, the drug that powered the Nazi blitzkrieg. The safe dosage was 1 pill, maybe 2 for extreme emergencies. But in the panic of the escape, freezing to death and exhausted, Aimo didn't take 1 pill. He couldn't get the bottle open with his mittens, so he poured the entire bottle into his hand. He swallowed 30 pills. That is enough methamphetamine to kill 10 men instantly. What happened next is one of the most insane survival stories in recorded history. Aimo didn't die. He became something else. He entered a state of drug-induced delirium that lasted for 2 weeks. He skied faster than humanly possible, leaving his own squad behind. He hallucinated battles that weren't happening. He fought imaginary wolves. He skied into a landmine, blew up his leg, and didn't stop. He lay in a ditch for a week, eating nothing but pine buds and a raw bird he caught with his bare hands. And through it all, the chemicals in his blood refused to let his heart stop. When he was finally found by friendly forces weeks later, he had skied over 400 kilometers alone. His heart rate was a staggering 200 beats per minute. He weighed only 94 pounds. He had essentially vibrated his way through the Arctic Circle, fueled by a lethal dose of chemistry that would have exploded a normal man. Aimo Koivunen didn't just survive the war, he lived to be 71 years old. Sometimes you don't need drugs or brain injuries to cheat death. Sometimes you just need sheer, impossible luck. Our final story takes us to the Mexican Revolution, 1915. Wenceslao Miguel was a soldier fighting against the government. He was captured. He was sentenced to death without trial. The sentence was immediate execution by firing squad. This is not a metaphor. Wenceslao stood against a wall. 8 soldiers raised their rifles. The order was given: fire. 8 bullets slammed into his body. Wenceslao fell to the ground, writhing in pain. But the procedure wasn't over. To ensure the job is done, the commanding officer performs the coup de grace, the mercy shot. The officer walked up to Wenceslao's bleeding body, placed a revolver point blank against his head, and pulled the trigger. The bullet entered his right cheek and exited below his left ear. The officer holstered his gun and walked away, leaving the body to rot. But Wenceslao waited. He waited for the footsteps to fade. He waited for the sun to go down. And then the man with 9 bullets in his body stood up.
Despite having his face shattered and his body riddled with lead, he crawled away to a nearby church for sanctuary. He was treated in secret. His face remained permanently disfigured, a map of the violence he had endured. But he lived. He became known as El Fusilado, the executed one. He toured the world, showing his scars, living proof that sometimes death just misses. He lived a full life, dying of old age in 1976, 60 years after he was executed. 3 men, one who couldn't sleep, one who couldn't stop, and one who couldn't die. Their stories serve as a terrifying reminder. We think we understand biology. We think we know the limits of the human machine. But when pushed to the absolute edge, the human body is capable of glitching the rules of reality itself. Which one of these fates would you fear the most? The endless night, the chemical frenzy, or the execution wall? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories from the dark corners of history.
February 1974. Norio Suzuki enters the Philippine jungle. He is hunting a living relic of World War II. This is not a legend, but a soldier still fighting a forgotten war. Locals call him the Mountain Demon, a phantom who strikes from the shadows, vanishing back into the jungle. But this is no ghost. It is the Imperial Army's last soldier. As night falls, Suzuki sets a trap. He makes himself bait. He lays out Japanese magazines from 1974 like an offering to a spirit. He stands by his fire and shouts into the void, begging the war to be over. The only answer is silence. From the earth itself, the ghost rises. His camouflage is so perfect that he was invisible just seconds ago. It is Lieutenant Hiro Onoda, 51 years old. He has been fighting World War II for 29 years. Suzuki raises his hands, trembling. He tells the soldier he has come to bring him home, but Onoda doesn't blink. He has killed 30 people after the peace treaty was signed. To him, this boy is just another enemy trick. Onoda looks at the magazines, at the pictures of skyscrapers and bullet trains. He dismisses them immediately. He believes it is all elaborate propaganda. Suzuki pleads with him, explaining that Japan has lost and the emperor is worried. But Onoda is iron. He tells Suzuki that only one man can relieve him of duty, his commanding officer, Major Taniguchi. If the major orders it, he will surrender. If not, he will stay and fight forever. In Japan, Suzuki finds the major in a bookstore. For 30 years, he lived with the guilt of the men he left behind. Now the past has come knocking. The bookseller vanishes, and the major returns. The old man prepares to keep a 30-year-old promise. Back in the jungle, the heat is suffocating. Major Taniguchi stands in the clearing, sweating in his heavy wool uniform, terrified that the jungle has finally claimed his soldier. Onoda emerges. He doesn't walk, he marches. A statue of discipline, he snaps a salute that echoes through history. Taniguchi reads the order. All military duties are relieved. The words hang in the air. Onoda freezes. The war is over. Onoda lays down his sword. He fought time for 29 years. In the end, time won, but his belief remains immortal. Stranger to modern Japan, he moved to Brazil to raise cattle and teach survival skills. He sought the quiet of the wild once more. He passed away in 2014 at the age of 91, a warrior who finally found his peace. A man stood in Havana, writing under the assumption that time had already run out. Outside, Cuba waited for invasion. American warships ringed the island.
Reconnaissance aircraft crossed the sky. Military units dug in along the coast, preparing for a landing that seemed inevitable. It is October 1962. The world is holding its breath. US and Soviet tensions have reached their absolute peak, and at the center of it all sits a tiny Caribbean island that most people assumed was just a pawn on a superpower chessboard. But what if I told you the real danger wasn't in Washington or Moscow? What if the glitch, the hidden fault in the system that nearly caused global nuclear war, was something no one in either capital fully understood until it was almost too late? This is the story they don't teach in school. The story of Cuba's secret nuclear brinksmanship and the terrifying moments when the fate of the world rested not with presidents or premiers, but with a handful of desperate men convinced they had nothing left to lose. Fidel Castro believed the decision had already been made in Washington. He believed the United States would invade Cuba within days, and if that happened, he believed the war would not remain conventional. Castro had watched the buildup closely. The missiles on Cuban soil were not symbolic, they were operational. Soviet medium and intermediate range nuclear weapons capable of reaching much of the continental United States. These weren't props in a political theater. Crews trained under extreme pressure, security tightened, communications narrowed. The weapons were real, the threat was real. And what made it all so extraordinarily dangerous was a single critical detail. Cuba did not control the missiles. Moscow did. How did nuclear weapons arrive on Cuban soil without the United States detecting them in time? The answer reveals one of the most audacious covert operations in Cold War history and a breathtaking failure of American intelligence. Khrushchev's desperate play to alter the global power balance had worked, at least for now. Hidden beneath jungle canopy, photographed from 70,000 feet by cameras mounted on aircraft so fragile they couldn't be armed to defend themselves. The secret was out, but what happened next, that's where the real glitch begins. Here is what most histories leave out. At the height of the crisis, 4 Soviet submarines were operating in the waters around Cuba. Each one carried a nuclear torpedo. Each torpedo had the explosive power of the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. They were operating independently, cut off from Moscow, unable to surface without risking detection. Their commanders were under orders that gave them terrifying discretion. If attacked, if contact with command was lost, they were authorized to make their own decision. On October 27th, the single most dangerous day in human history, one of those submarines, B-59, was depth-charged by American destroyers. The crew had been out of contact with Moscow for days. The captain, Valentin Savitsky, believed war had already started. He gave the order to prepare the nuclear torpedo. 2 officers agreed. 1 did not. His name was Vasily Arkhipov. He was the flotilla commander aboard B-59, and under Soviet protocol, all 3 senior officers had to agree for the weapon to be fired. Arkhipov refused. He argued. He held firm. He persuaded Savitsky to surface and await orders. The torpedo was not fired. You are alive because of that refusal. But here is the deeper glitch, the one that almost no one talks about. Castro understood his limitation. He did not control the missiles. Moscow did. And yet, as the crisis reached its most dangerous hour, he made a request that went far beyond Cuban sovereignty. He wrote to the Soviet leadership with a blunt assessment. An American invasion, he warned, would mean the end of the Cuban Revolution. There would be no second chance. If U.S. forces landed, Castro urged the Soviet Union not to hesitate. The missiles should be used first. A preemptive nuclear strike, not as retaliation, not as deterrence, as an opening move. The message crossed the Atlantic at the most dangerous moment of the Cold War. In Moscow, leaders were already under strain. Soviet ships were approaching the American naval quarantine. Communications with Washington were fragile. Miscalculation was a constant risk. Castro's letter landed in the Kremlin like a shock. This was the glitch. Not a computer error, not a radar malfunction. A human being, under unbearable pressure, convinced the worst was inevitable and deciding that if the end was coming anyway, it might as well come on his terms. Faulty intelligence, delayed messages, misinterpretations amplified at every level. The command chain, the thing that was supposed to prevent accidental nuclear war, had fractured, and nobody in Washington or Moscow fully knew how badly until years later when the classified documents finally surfaced. Fear, pressure, individual decisions, these were the real variables, not the missiles, not the warships, the people holding the trigger and what they believed in those final desperate hours. To the Soviet leadership, Castro's proposal was not defiance, it was desperation, and it was unacceptable. The idea of launching nuclear weapons first, especially in defense of a small island, was viewed as suicidal. Such an act would guarantee total war, not escalation, not negotiation, annihilation. Moscow had placed the missiles in Cuba to alter the strategic balance, not to trigger the end of the world. The deployment was meant to be controlled, reversible, political. Castro's proposal shattered that assumption. For the first time, Soviet leaders confronted the reality that the crisis was not entirely in their hands. The host country, the front line, was prepared to burn with the weapons it did not command. The response from Moscow was firm. There would be no first strike. The missiles would not be used unless the Soviet Union itself was attacked. Cuba was not informed of every detail. Trust frayed. Castro felt sidelined, exposed, and expendable. The weapons on his soil were governed by decisions made thousands of kilometers away. As negotiations between Washington and Moscow intensified, Havana was largely excluded. The fate of Cuba was being decided without Cuban participation. When the crisis ended, the missiles were withdrawn. The invasion never came, but the letter remained. The Cuban Missile Crisis reshaped nuclear diplomacy forever. In its immediate aftermath, the leaders of the two most powerful nations on Earth looked at what had almost happened, and they were terrified. The Moscow-Washington hotline was established in 1963, not because of a close call at the negotiating table, because of a close call in a submarine, because of a letter no one was supposed to see, because of all the glitches, human and mechanical, that had nearly slipped past every safeguard. The crisis revealed a lesson that military and political planners had refused to fully accept. In nuclear conflict, the most dangerous variable is not the weapon, it's the person holding it, their fear, their information, their certainty that the worst is already happening. And here is why that matters today. The nuclear powers of the 21st century face many of the same fault lines: communication gaps, proxy conflicts, leaders under pressure making decisions with incomplete information. The glitch that almost ended the world in 1962 was not a unique historical accident. It was a template. Nuclear war was avoided not only by restraint in Washington and Moscow, but by refusal. A refusal to follow an order born of certainty that the worst was inevitable. A submarine officer who said no, a superpower that said no. Thin margins, quiet moments, small decisions with infinite consequences. The Cuban Missile Crisis is often remembered as a contest between superpowers, but for a brief, terrifying moment, the greatest risk came from the smallest player, standing at the center of the storm, convinced that survival demanded the unthinkable. We didn't dodge a bullet in October 1962. We dodged 1,000 of them, and most of us never knew any of their names.
If you like more stories like this, you can find more in the playlist. Hit like if this changed how you see the crisis. Subscribe so you don't miss the next one. It genuinely helps this channel keep digging into the archives. See you next time.
September 26, 1983. Cold War. Moscow is asleep. 100 feet below the pine forests of the Soviet Union.
Inside the Serpukhov 15 bunker, the silence was absolute, broken only by the low-frequency vibration of computer racks and the steady clicking of terminal keys.
Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov sat before a wall of monitors, his eyes tracing the rhythmic flicker of data. Nearby, a young technician monitored a printer churning out stacks of punch cards. It was past midnight when the sirens tore through the silence. A single word pulsed in blood-red Cyrillic across the main screen: launch. According to the Oko satellite system, an American Minuteman missile had risen from a silo in Montana.
Petrov was caught in physical suspension, half risen from his chair, his eyes wide and reflecting the jarring red text. On the digital map, a single white dot appeared over Montana, followed by a trajectory line arcing toward the North Pole. Then the machine escalated. A second dot, a third, a fourth, a fifth. The system was no longer suggesting a threat, it was confirming a massacre.
The protocol for this moment was absolute. The machinery of the Cold War had been designed to be frictionless, a sequence of logic gates and hard-wired commands built to ensure that if one side died, both did. Petrov's hand hovered inches above a heavy black Bakelite telephone that linked directly to the general staff of the Red Army. He didn't lift it yet. He looked down at the red-stamped manual on his desk, his jaw clenching against the weight of the entire world. He had less than 15 minutes before the projected impact. If he reported a confirmed attack, the Soviet leadership would initiate a counterstrike, launching thousands of warheads before the first American missile even touched Russian soil. In the corner, automated printers began to scream, churning out continuous streams of coordinates and launch codes. The young technician tore off a sheet of paper, his hands trembling as he waited for the order to confirm the attack. Petrov looked at the locked metal boxes on the wall containing the counterstrike keys.
The young technician at the side terminal looked back at Petrov, his face pale and sweating, waiting for the command to confirm the report. But Petrov felt a jagged inconsistency. He squinted at the 5 dots on the map, his mind working through a terrifying gamble.
If the United States were to start the final war, they would not do it with 5 missiles, they would do it with hundreds.
It defied every doctrine of total war. He leaned over a secondary monitor showing high-altitude clouds and saw a bright, unnatural glare, a ghost in the data. He picked up the phone. His voice was steady despite the trembling in his chest. He did not report a strike. He told the duty officer at headquarters that the alarm was a system malfunction. The crew watched him in a state of terror. Petrov reached out and manually flipped the switches, silencing the audible siren, leaving only the visual pulse of the red lights. For several agonizing minutes, the bunker fell into a suffocating silence. A large analog wall clock became the only source of sound. The young technician sat with his head bowed, hands clasped behind his neck. Petrov sat perfectly still, staring at the blank space above his monitors. One by one, the timers reached 0. The 5 dots on the digital map reached their projected impact points and simply vanished. There were no flashes, there were no shockwaves. The system refreshed, the trajectory lines disappeared, and the screens returned to their dull, indifferent amber glow. The world outside the bunker continued to sleep, oblivious to the fact that it had nearly ceased to exist. Millions across the Soviet Union and the United States slept in their beds, their lives continuing only because of a single man's hesitation, never knowing that the countdown to an atomic midnight had reached its final trembling seconds. Inside, Petrov was slumped back in his chair, his uniform disheveled and his collar undone. He reached for a cold cup of coffee, his hand shaking, opened his logbook, recorded the event as a simple technical failure. He picked up his officer's cap and walked down the long concrete tunnel toward the exit, his shadow stretching out before him. He had looked into the abyss and refused to blink. The immediate aftermath was not a celebration. Petrov was interrogated. He was neither rewarded nor executed. He was reprimanded for failing to properly document the incident in his logbook during the crisis. He lived out his days in a small, cramped apartment in Frysino. For decades, his role in preventing a nuclear holocaust remained a state secret. It was only after the collapse of the Soviet Union in the 1990s that the details of the Serpukhov 15 incident were declassified. Stanislav Petrov died in 2017. He never considered himself a hero. When asked why he didn't follow the protocol, his answer was always grounded in the same cold logic he used that night. I was the only one who had a civilian education. All my subordinates were professional soldiers. If they had been in my place, they would have reported the strike. In 1961, Berlin was turned into a prison overnight. The Berlin Wall wasn't just concrete, it was a calculated killing machine, a death strip of sand, tripwires, and snipers designed to stop anyone from leaving. But while the world watched the soldiers on the wall, a secret war was happening underground and in the sky. In this video, we are going to break down the three most audacious escape stories of the Cold War. We often think of the Berlin Wall as just that, a wall, a simple line of concrete blocks, but that is a dangerous misconception. If you looked at the border from a satellite, you wouldn't see a line, you would see a scar, a wide, desolate wound cutting through the heart of the city. This was the death strip. It was a machine designed by engineers to hunt human beings. First, the inner wall, then the Stalin's lawn, carpets of steel spikes hidden beneath the grass. Then the dog runs, where German shepherds roamed on long leashes. Then the floodlights, turning night into day. And finally, the raked sand, kept perfectly smooth so that a single footprint would be a death sentence. If you ran, the guards didn't just have permission to shoot, they were ordered to. By 1962, the message was clear. The ground is lethal. The streets are watched. So a group of young students realized that if they wanted to live, they had to stop looking at the horizon and start looking down. They weren't miners, they weren't engineers, they were art students, musicians, and young tradesmen. They had no blueprints and they had no tools, but they had something more dangerous: desperation. Their stories would become the legends of Tunnel 29 and Tunnel 57. Imagine the physical reality of this. You are starting in a basement in West Berlin, often an old bakery or a ruined shop. You have to dig under the border fortifications, under the death strip, and break into a specific basement on the east side. The tunnels were small, barely wide enough for a human shoulder. You are crawling through clay and mud 12 meters underground. The air is thin, the oxygen runs out quickly, leaving you dizzy and nauseous. And the water was a constant enemy. A single burst pipe could drown you in minutes, or worse, cause the street above to collapse, alerting the guards. But the physical danger was nothing compared to the psychological terror. Tunnel 57 was named after the number of people it eventually saved. It was a massive operation, but to dig a tunnel this big, you needed people. You needed hands to haul the dirt. You needed couriers to send messages to the east. And this is where the Stasi, the secret police, thrived. Every time a new volunteer showed up to dig, the team leaders had to ask themselves, is this man here to help, or is he a spy? Paranoia was the third person in the tunnel. You worked shoulder to shoulder in the dark with men you barely knew, terrified that one wrong word would end with a grenade rolled down the shaft. Yet, despite the terror, they succeeded. In October 1964, over 2 nights, 57 men, women, and children crawled through the mud to West Berlin. It remains the single most successful mass escape in the history of the wall. They didn't use guns, they used shovels.
While the students fought the earth below, millions of West Berliners experienced a different kind of haunting every single day. The geography of Berlin was a mess. The subway lines, the U-Bahn and S-Bahn, had been built long before the wall. Some of these lines started in the west, passed directly under East Berlin, and then emerged back in the west. The East Germans could have cut the lines. Instead, they sealed the stations. West Berliners called them Geisterbahnhöfe, ghost stations. Imagine your morning commute. You are sitting in a modern, brightly lit train car. You are reading the newspaper. You are free. But as the train crosses the sector border, the train slows. The windows become mirrors against the darkness outside. And then you see it. A dim yellow light flickers on a dusty platform. The tiles are old and cracked. The station signs are from a different era. There are no passengers. But the platform isn't empty. Standing in the shadows, armed with machine guns, are the East German border guards. They stand motionless, staring into your train car as you rattle past. For 20 seconds, you are a time traveler. You are looking directly into a prison. The passengers inside the train would often fall silent as they passed through, witnessing the